In order to piece together this fragmented world, UD felt heartbroken. Whoever is full enough to hold back her from saving the world, she will let anyone know how to write death. When people are struggling to survive, where is the power to destroy the world? The protagonist's perspective, no CP, no dog blood. Let's take a look at how many different poses there are in the apocalypse together. Keywords of the novel. Mystery. Escalation crisis. No pop-ups. Mystery. Escalation crisis TXT complete collection download. Mystery. Escalation crisis latest chapter reading. Chapter 1. Difficult to breath pain, 1. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 1. Difficult to breath pain, 1. The low pressure in the dark red sky is on the horizon, and the sticky air adheres to the ground, leaving a withered and rotten landscape. A hastily erected grave suddenly moved, and the stone serving as the tombstone tilted to one side. As the soil bulged more, a pale hand broke free from its confinement and knocked the stone down with a thud. Check the 8 systems. The owner of that hand, with anger, quickly scraped open the remaining soil buried on her body, grabbed the edge of the grave with both hands, and leaped forward. Turning around and jumping back into the grave, pressing his face against the soft soil. Almost poisoned me. UD muttered as he reached out and dug out a dirt-stained gas mask to buckle onto his face. She jumped out of the grave again and squinted at it. This looks like a world with severe air pollution, and the place she is in is like the urban-rural fringe of her former world. The buildings with various signs hanging on both sides of the road are lifeless and devoid of human voices. In the cracks of the buildings, the plants on the land are tilted to the ground, showing a decaying dark purple color. Come on, UD confirmed that there was no danger around him and sat cross-legged in front of the grave, closing his eyes to start receiving messages. The chaotic images and sounds constantly flooded into her mind, sending a message before the last civilization in the world was dying. This is her first post-apocalyptic journey after completing a beginner's tutorial comparable to The Great Escape. Due to an illegal gene hybridization experiment that has lasted for decades, the genetic community of marine microorganisms has been severely polluted, causing organisms that originally mainly produced oxygen and carbon dioxide to start producing sulfuric acid and nitrite. This change is too subtle and subtle. Over several decades, the world's temperature quietly rose, and abnormal weather conditions like acid rain frequently appeared until the surface could no longer survive for a long time. The goal of restoring the ecology is far away, and humans can only establish underground cities to maintain their survival. When UD entered here, it was the last week of the dungeon's opening. In just over a month, the coalition government of the dungeon passed the City Sealing Act, and since then, humans have never stepped out of the ground again. The grave she teleported into contained a woman with the same name and surname as her. The woman had emphysema, and on her way to the entrance of the dungeon, her condition worsened and she vomited blood and died. The companions couldn't find her family, so they had to bury her on the spot and didn't remove her mask, giving UD a discount. UD twitched the corner of his mouth. No wonder there was a fishy smell inside the mask. The diaphragm should belong to the diaphragm, but she doesn't want to take off her mask in such air. The woman's body had temporarily disappeared due to the arrival of UD, and it was not until UD left that she returned to her original position. UD turned around, pondering where to start in restoring the grave she had dug open to its original state. As she was planing, she pulled onto a piece of weed that seemed to have withered away. UD noticed that the weed couldn't be pulled, and upon closer inspection, he found that although the grass appeared to have decayed on the surface, its roots and stems were still rooted in the soil. From the exposed parts, it was even considered robust. This is a heavily polluted world, and plants that can survive on the surface clearly play a significant role in changing the environment. In the pictures received by UD, there have never been any surface plants, which indicates that after humans migrated to the underground city, they never came up again until society collapsed and humans hugged their graves and perished. Although UD's actions are rough, her mind is delicate and she never misses anything unusual. She put in a lot of effort to pull out the grass, and the area where the roots and stems broke began to drip colorless liquid outward. The juice that came into contact with the air slowly became sticky, reflecting a brownish-orange light in the dark red sunlight. The sticky juice dripped onto the corner of Yudi's clothes, burning a burnt black hole. However, the part that Yudi rubbed against with his fingertips seemed to be absorbed by the skin, and there was no response. Yudi raised his eyebrows, closed his fingers, and squeezed hard a few times. After the juice in the rhizome was squeezed dry, the broken surface slowly turned black, as if wrapped in a layer of burnt shell. Useful. Yudi began to dig the soil around the stem, hoping to put it away and take it to the dungeon. She thought this thing was at most the size of a green radish, but she didn't expect it to look like a huge Japanese melon, and the part that Yudi broke off was not even 1/3 of the length of the main body. She had just carried this thing in her arms when she heard the sound of an engine coming from afar, which was a pickup truck with a very high bass. The person in the car noticed her standing next to the grave and flashed the lights several times. Yudi felt lucky because according to the information she received, it would take about 3 days to walk to the dungeon recently. With this car, it only takes half a day to get there. Yudi quickly waved his hand and signaled for the other party to stop. "Sister, are you going to the dungeon?" The passenger seat was a large, sturdy man wearing camouflage clothing and a half-cut face mask. A scar extended from his forehead to his temples, missing a small ear. The exposed eyes looked up and down at Yudi. "That's right." Yudi nodded. "Can you take me with you?" The big guy turned his head and asked the driver's meaning with his eyes. Yudi tilted his head and followed his gaze, but the driver was a short-haired man wearing a bulletproof vest and a face mask covering his entire face, which was considered fully armed. Yudi could feel the little guy looking at him with his spare light, calmly looking at the other person. The driver nodded slightly, and the big guy turned his head and said, "Get in the car." Yudi thanked her and prepared to climb onto the pickup truck, carrying her big Japanese melon. As soon as she opened the door, a dog face met her in front of her. The big guy turned back from the passenger seat and said, "By the way, there's a dog in the back seat. Don't squeeze it." Yudi twitched the corner of his mouth and sat down next to Damu, saying, "It looks quite well behaved." A smile suddenly appeared in the words of Big Head, "Yes, he's quite well behaved." Damu also wore a custom-made filter mask, which sniffed the Japanese melon in Yudi's arms and excitedly tried to pull it with its claws. Yudi protected her Japanese melon and competed with Damu in palm techniques. "What kind of thing are you holding in your arms?" the big guy asked curiously as he saw how interested Damu was in what was in her arms. "Eating." Yudi pushed aside Damu's nose and tilted his head. "Can this be eaten?" The big guy was a bit surprised and turned to look at the things in her arms. For over a decade, the harmful substances grown in the fields have been severely exceeding the standard. In recent years, human food has become synthetic nutritional cakes, and distilled water with additives has been consumed. The big guy hasn't eaten natural food for a long time. Perhaps. Can you let it stop? Yudi raised his hand, moistened with German saliva, and said angrily. The big guy smiled and ordered Damu, "Mibao, sit down." Upon hearing the instructions from the big guy, Mibao immediately sat up straight, but his eyes still glanced into Yudi's arms. The big guy reached out and straightened Mibao's crooked face mask, looking at Yudi. "It's really delicious. It's so greedy. It takes a lot of effort to feed it nutritious cakes." Yudi pursed his lips and said, "I'm just this one. I'm planning to take it to the dungeon laboratory. Don't let it harm me." The big guy said sternly, "Of course, if this thing can be eaten and grown, we might not have to stay inside for so long." The big guy said that the shelter period announced by the coalition government is 15 to 20 years. Yudishin said that the humans here really underestimated the persistence of this pollution. No wonder when they found out they couldn't get out for a lifetime, there would be riots, leading to the collapse of order. Be prepared for the long term, sighed UD. The settings are complete and the plot is complete. Slowly fill in the gaps. End of this chapter. Chapter 2. Difficult to breath pain, 2. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 2. Difficult to breath pain, 2. The journey was neither short nor long. When he saw the identification number, EP1-10, written at the entrance of the dungeon, UD had already become familiar with the big guys. The driver's name is Ching Dai, and he is actually the wife of a big guy. They met at the Institute of Microbial Genetics, where Ching Dai was still a researcher working on microbial genome tracing. Later, in a large-scale environmental fundamentalist attack, the research institute was mistakenly targeted and suffered serious damage, and Ching Dai almost lost her life there. And the big guy, named Blue Dragon, was one of the security officers sent by the coalition government to the research institute. At that time, he was still young and was pursuing Ching Dai. The scar on his face was the result of the attack. A person rushed in and detonated a neurotoxin bomb in front of the two of them. In order to protect the microorganisms in the small culture dish, Ching Dai actually used her body to protect the incubator. In a moment of desperation, Blue Dragon threw the person to the ground, so that they could not be blown into pieces. The fragments of the bomb explosion cut Blue Dragon's face, and the neurotoxin kept them lying on the ground for almost a day and a night before they were rescued. The two of them couldn't move and could only rely on talking to wait for rescue. They talked about many things they wouldn't usually mention, and it was at that time that Ching Dai agreed to Blue Dragon's pursuit and agreed to date him. Later, the research institute was rebuilt, and Ching Dai originally planned to go back to work. However, the permanent damage caused by neurotoxins to her body was quite significant, and she couldn't think for long periods of time. She would fall asleep for more than 12 hours a day. In addition, her experimental research results were destroyed in the attack, and the research institute ultimately decided to dismiss her. Although compensation was given, Ching Dai remained quite angry. Equally depressed, not only Ching Dai, but also Blue Dragon. The degree of impact on him is different from that on Ching Dai, except that his limbs will intermittently and uncontrollably twitch. However, for a security officer, a defender of a critical location, he is even more unsuitable. So this young couple both lost their jobs. Blue Dragon is fine. The organization transferred him to the Dog Training Institute as a trainer, and Mibao was the one who led the training. Ching Dai was quite difficult, and her former teacher found a way to hire her back as a consultant to the college as his teaching assistant, providing her with food and accommodation. She promised that after Ching Dai recovered from her headache, she would be allowed to participate in her own research project. Ching Dai certainly agreed, but in the end, she found out that her teacher was just trying to use her as a research subject for neurotoxins, taking advantage of her. The whole farce ended with Blue Dragon beating up the teacher, and even Mibao was kicked out of the team. Ching Dai was hit too hard and decided to take a long vacation while getting married. Blue Dragon thought that in such a situation, Ching Dai would break up with him, but he didn't expect Ching Dai to propose to him. He happily agreed and moved in with Mibao. After the deterioration of the environment and the start of underground city construction, Ching Dai purchased a set of simple experimental equipment and conducted research at home, while Lan Long did daily rehabilitation and took Mibao to protect his home in the increasingly chaotic world. Afterwards, they encountered UD on their way to the dungeon. Upon hearing their story, UD was a bit stunned. Why didn't Brother Blue Dragon keep his mouth open? When UD said he had no partner, even their harmonious life seemed to be lacking. If it weren't for Ching Dai giving him an elbow, he could still tell his pursuit sutra. Let's talk about you. Ching Dai, who had been silent for a while, spoke with a very special smoky voice. Which research institute are you from? UD touched Mibao's head and said, I'm not from any research institute, I'm just an ordinary person. How did you discover edible plants? I dug it in the grave. Blue Dragon exchanged a glance with Qing Dai and turned to look at her. So you were digging graves before? Ah. Ud looked at Blue Dragon confidently and patted the thing in his arms. Exactly. I found a grass growing on the grave, and when I pulled it out, I pulled it out. Regardless of why you want to uproot the grave grass for now. Blue Dragon furrowed his brows together. How dare you eat the things in the grave? I didn't eat it. Ud raised his neck. It was Mibao who drooled that I guessed it could eat. At this point, their car had merged into the queue of cars entering the underground city. Qing Dai stopped and turned to reach out to Ud. Show me. Ud politely declined. I won't give it. Qing Dai did not retract her hand and said, I was studying plants that can survive in strong acidic environments at home. The thing you dug out is very valuable. This is the first time someone has found a plant that can survive and is non-toxic in nature. Ud did not answer her words. You said you wanted to take it to the laboratory, but do you know who that group of people is? Qing Dai's pace suddenly quickened. Ud raised his eyes and looked directly into Qing Dai's eyes hidden behind her goggles. Qing Dai suddenly had a headache and couldn't help but get excited. Do you know what they would do? They would breed this plant and take it for themselves, and use it to draw people a pie that would never be possible to return to the ground. Wife. Blue Dragon interrupted Qing Dai's speech in a loud voice, took out a plate of pills from his arms, and picked out 2 to hand to Qing Dai. Qing Dai took a few deep breaths, took the pill from Blue Dragon's hand, broke it off twice, lifted the mask, and stuffed it all into her mouth. Blue Dragon caressed Qing Dai's back with heartache and said softly, if you don't give it, then don't give it. This is your thing, and we just didn't see it. But you should think carefully about what A Dai said and give it to her. It's better than giving it to that group of things. Ud asked in response, you also said that you conducted the experiment at home. Now that you are moving into the dungeon as civilians, where do you get the equipment from? Your body is not very convenient, what if you destroy it? You. Blue Dragon felt a little annoyed when she spoke so rudely. Qing Dai calmed down and pinched Blue Dragon's arm, saying, you're right. But give me a portion, the plant tubers won't die from splitting. Give me a small piece, and the rest will be disposed of by you, just like the fare for taking you here. Ud touched Mibao's ear and said, that's okay. But have you figured it out yet? Qing Dai was taken aback by her question and said, what? If someone knew you also had plant samples that could grow in strong acidic environments and were non-toxic, Ud imitated Qing Dai's tone. What would they do? Blue Dragon realized this and frowned silently, asking. Qing Dai didn't take it seriously and said, if you don't say it, and I don't say it, who would know? Isn't that right? Ud twitched his lips and said, okay. Just be prepared. Give me a clean cloth. Blue Dragon took out a roll of gauze from the storage box and handed it to Ud. Ud carefully broke off a piece and covered the cut with a cloth, tying it up. Its juice should not come into contact with air, otherwise it will be corrosive. It's okay to come into direct contact. Okay. Blue Dragon nodded and put away the cloth bag. Ud finally pinched Mibao's face, opened the car door, and jumped down. Thank you for your car. If you can see me again in the future, don't forget me. Definitely. Blue Dragon waved his hand. Ud raised his eyebrows and said, will you definitely not forget, or will you definitely forget? She hugged the big Japanese melon and turned to walk towards the dungeon. End of this chapter. Chapter 3. Difficult to breath pain, 3. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 3 Difficult to breath pain, 3. Dungeons are called underground. In fact, due to the limitations of construction time and architectural layout, some cities also have city bodies on the ground. This part of the area is hidden in the mountains, and some less critical functional areas are set up inside. Ud stood in the back row of the long crowd, holding onto something in his arms. The defensive wall of the underground city is 20 meters high, backed by a mine, making the entrance for people to pass through appear quite small. The city entry inspection is very strict, and this world has extremely advanced identity recognition technology. From birth, the coalition government registers each person's genetic information and creates a unique identity recognition chip, which is implanted in the collarbone. The person's personal file is also stored inside and can be read with special instructions. UD looked at the scanners blocking everyone in front of him and the soldiers staring around him, silently asking the system in his mind, "Can I pass that instrument?" As soon as she finished asking, she felt a swelling and pain under her collarbone. She reached out and felt a faint lump. "Oh, can you still create a physical ID for me?" The system did not respond. UD has become accustomed to this. The only time this broken system communicated with her was when she was just bound to this post-apocalyptic system after her death. The system reluctantly said a few words to explain its existence, and after that, apart from transmitting information, it never spoke again. In the virtual world of the beginner's tutorial, all the instructions given to her by the system were images, forming ideas directly in her mind instead of talking to her. The process of waiting to enter the city is long and boring. Blue Dragon and Qingdai have ground assets and other procedures to handle. Those standing in the same line as UD are all proletarians. These people are generally quiet and highly alert to the environment, so there are few people talking. UD didn't know anyone, so he had to harass the system in his mind. UD thinks that judging by human standards, this system is either language barrier or autism, otherwise how could it be unresponsive to her jokes? While UD was changing her strategy and attempting to make the system speak with more aggressive garbage, suddenly someone tugged at her clothes. UD lowered his head and saw a thin and weak little boy holding a smaller carrot head in his hand, both wearing inappropriate large masks. "Sister," the little boy spoke timidly. "What are you doing?" UD took a big step back in front of the team, cautiously maintaining a distance of 1 meter from the boy. "Are you alone?" Two pairs of watery big eyes looked at her pitifully. The alarm rang in UD's mind, and some bad memories from his lifetime surged in his heart. "If you have something to do, go ahead and find that uncle with a gun, don't come to me." The little boy was sternly rejected, so he lowered his head in injustice and said to his sister, "I said no one would be willing to take us, you don't believe it." "Sister, let's go with you, okay?" The little carrot had a more delicate head, even though she was dressed shabby and half of her face was covered by a mask, it couldn't conceal her outstanding appearance. UD was about to put on a fierce look to scare them when she heard the old lady standing behind her in a few positions say, "You two dolls, stand in the back, just like your rogue father." The two children saw the old lady with sharp eyebrows and eyes, and immediately put away their aggrieved expression. They angrily scolded her, saying, "An old lady with no one to see her off." They turned around and ran towards the front of the queue, and soon disappeared. The old lady pooped and, seeing UD looking at her, explained helplessly, "It's not that my old lady is mean, these two children just want to grab a spot. The father of these two children has made a mistake in our production team, and it's not me who won't let his family go to the city. You're still young, so you can't be harmed by them. Can you grab a spot? Can you still grab a spot?" UD was a bit surprised. The old lady was even more surprised than UD and said, "Don't you know? Why don't young people nowadays care about anything?" The conversation between the two was like a bubble suddenly rising from a calm lake, and the others standing around them also began to join in the chat. A tall and thin ant standing in front of UD poked her arm and said, "You don't understand that yet. The father of those two children has run away and no one has taken them to the city. They are considered orphans and will be handed over to families with children who have been allocated rooms. Isn't that good?" Udiki said. "Tisk, with their own children, who is willing to take care of others? Besides, the government has said that resources are limited underground, and people like us who don't have houses usually live in large dormitories, with limited food and drinks. Those who have rooms are also in high demand, and children can be a burden at times like this. The bald man in front of the old lady said, "You're saying that too harshly. Didn't the government say it? Families that accept orphans receive subsidies. Subsidies, how long can they last? If they can live a good life, why don't those 2 children wait for distribution? Their food and drink are already good without being deducted. How can they still be so foolish at an old age? They just know this, waiting to deceive those who don't know." As she spoke, she also glanced at the innocent beauty on her face. The uncle hesitated and said, "Would it be even better if they find strangers to bring in? Of course, if you bring them in, you will be registered as a guardian, don't you think?" Uncle stopped talking. He certainly knows that guardians have the responsibility of guardians, such as in the case of distribution, because he knows that these families have suffered losses. As long as they are not openly abused, they do not care much about the situation of the orphans. The parents of those families are not considered guardians of the orphans, but only receptionists. In fact, apart from providing food, clothing, and housing, they do not need to be responsible in any other aspect. But if registered as guardians, they will be responsible for all the lives of these children before reaching adulthood. The uncle held it for a while and said, "These 2 children are quite clever." Auntie agreed, "I know how to rely on others." The topic of the 2 children has come to an end here. Although they detest the ghosts and spirits of these 2 little things, they also know that in this society where adults find it difficult to survive, what can you expect from 2 struggling children? UD listened with great interest as they talked about their past lives. They are all older people, survivors of various malignant diseases, and their lives are almost a history of pollution deterioration in this world. Based on the world's distress messages transmitted to her by the previous system, UD has discovered a point that will be overlooked by future humans. In the original course of events, the coalition government, after passing the City Sealing Act, focused its resources on researching methods for soil acidification, hoping to change the surface environment within 20 years. In private, it also restarted genome research, cultivating plants that can metabolize acidic gases and embryos that can adapt to acidic environments. The former inexplicably failed, while the latter nurtured many bizarre creatures that were placed on the surface but lost tracking and monitoring due to the collapse of the underground city order, failing to become an opportunity for human genetic evolution. It was the complete failure of the plant experiment that caught UD's attention. The thing she was holding in her arms was already huge for the tuberous plant, but she felt that it was very fresh and tender, and there was still room for growth. Aren't dungeons hidden thousands of meters below the surface? For over a decade, they haven't discovered that this thing is not affected by acidic environments. The distress messages sent by the world also did not mention this point. Before she dug up this thing, she had always thought that distress messages meant the death of all living beings, and that the world had turned into a dead place. Now it seems that this is not the case. According to reason, as long as there are living organisms, let alone plants, even microorganisms, over time, they will always breed new civilizations. Why does this world think that these survivors are its last civilization? It is a strange thing for such a still having a chance world to seek help from the apocalyptic system. UD looked at the boundless team in the distance, her eyes wide open, and began to quickly review everything that had happened in the world since the lockdown. End of this chapter. Chapter 4. Difficult to breath pain, 4. You are listening at novelfull.audio. This translator is experiencing an error, please try another translator. Chapter 5. Difficult to breath pain, 5. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 5 Difficult to breath pain, 5. You have many planting experiments here, UD said with a crooked head. Yes, we're trying. Yan Yu was about to answer when he suddenly realized, I haven't asked who you are yet. The surface has been completely acidified for several years, and no known plant can survive in the surface soil. Where did you find this? Also, The research institute you mentioned has long been closed, and I don't remember someone with your surname on the firing list back then. Realizing that she seemed to have said too much, Yenyu pursed her lips and leaned against the table, staring intently at Yudi. Didn't you say it, in the wild grave? Yenyu frowned and said, how deep is the tomb? 1/2 meter. Impossible. Yenyu said, this thickness of soil, Yudi interrupted, why on earth would you conclude that there will be no living creatures on the surface of the earth? This is common sense. Moreover, we have dozens of test data indicating that at the current acidity, only a small number of microbial species can metabolize normally. They exist in the form of individual cells and cannot reproduce in large quantities. Unless we study new species, there cannot be any living organisms on the surface. After speaking, he looked at Yudi with a skeptical expression on his face and said, you didn't get fresh plants from some kind of channel to deceive me, did you? What is your purpose? Yudi was stunned for a moment. Big brother, I know who you are. Didn't you hand me the business card yourself? I thought it was the first world mission that was relatively simple, so you inexplicably jumped out. Yenyu saw that Yudi was stunned and didn't speak. He thought he guessed right and glared at Yudi angrily. He took out a small thing that looked like a walkie-talkie from his pocket and called for the guard. Wait a moment, Yudi grabbed his wrist, wanting to reason with him. Yenyu thought Yudi was going to do something to him, so he screamed in fear and ran towards the door. He even pressed the emergency blockade button. Hey! Don't run. Yudi was locked in the laboratory and looked at Yenyu with a pale face in silence. She shouldn't have any simple ideas about the task. The laboratory is located in a sensitive area of the underground city, and the guards arrived quickly. Due to Yenyu's emergency lockdown, the chief director of the laboratory and the person in charge of this floor were also alarmed. With the idea that, as long as they have the opportunity to survive on the surface, social order will not collapse, and the civilization of this world will not go extinct, Yudi simply revealed all his speculations to the person in charge. The person in charge is an old man in his 60s. After listening to her explanation, he did not express any opinions, but he did not ask Yudi to return to the dormitory. He instructed Yenyu to take care of Yudi, and he entered the office alone without coming out all night. Yudi was too lazy to talk to Yenyu and lay on the cannibalistic sofa, communicating with the system in his mind. How about it, I've already completed the task, haven't I? It had to be me, I dug out the key things with just one click. Just leave the rest of the matter to their scientists, right? No need for me to stay here forever, right? Are you squeaking? Hello? 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 Yes. The system finally couldn't bear it anymore and broadcasted a real-time video into Yudi's mind. It turned out to be the surveillance footage from the laboratory supervisor's office. Yudi's eyes were momentarily lost, and he carefully watched the image playing in his mind. In a moment, Yudi jumped up angrily and said, "What? Why do we have to seal the city in advance?" Yenyu was already quietly looking at Yudi, but when she suddenly stared straight at the ceiling, she felt something was wrong. Yudi jumped up and shouted, completely turning himself into a representative of mental illness in Yenyu's heart. Yudi rushed over and grabbed Yenyu's collar, saying, "Take me to see your director." Yenyu desperately withdrew his body and said, Okay, you let go of me, I'll take you." Before he could finish speaking, Yudi only felt a pain in his waist and his body became uncontrollable. He fell back and hit the edge of the table with his head, then slammed to the ground. With a sharp pain, Yudi felt that his vision seemed to be blurred and his body felt a bit chilly. Yenyu put away his electric gun and cautiously kicked Yudi's leg. He looked at Yudi's wide eyes and trembled as he called for the guards to come over. In the sea of consciousness, Yudi was powerless and furious as he hammered into the void, spitting out a fragrant aroma in his mouth. There was no one else here, no need for quality. No, I'll die if I die. Why did the mission fail? Ah. The system silently transmitted her second distress message from this world. After Yudi's accidental death, the plant samples she brought with her did not cause much trouble. As Qingdai said, in order to ensure the stability of the underground city system, they treated the relevant experiments as high-level secrets, attempting to find genes that can metabolize strong acids in this plant and implant them into seeds of other species with fast growth rates and short growth periods. But if they can persist, there won't be this second distress message. When the results of the experiment were obtained, the underground city had already formed an inherent resident level, and such level differentiation could only be established in such a closed environment with extremely scarce survival resources. Once people returned to the ground, so before the riots arrived, the management team split internally. Because human survival has always relied on materials produced by microbial factories, plants have become almost a legendary existence, similar to, my grandmother told me they saw trees when they were young. Therefore, when the purification faction advocating for organizing residents to go to the surface to plant trees and afforestation risked spreading the news that sour soil can be purified, many people were skeptical. There are three main leaders in the dungeon, two of whom lean towards the purists, while the other has an unclear attitude. They approved the long-term plan of the purification faction to openly recruit advanced residents in the city. At first, it was okay for the first 2 days, but I didn't expect that from the third day onwards, not only did no one join, but the people who registered first even cancelled their registration one after another. The person in charge of the purification plan was lost in thought when suddenly someone hit the head with a nutrition cake at the recruitment office. She called for the guards to arrest the person, but the person kept shouting that she was risking her life. This is a big hat, and the person in charge quickly called a few colleagues over. After asking the subordinates, he found out that a rumor had been circulating from somewhere these days, claiming that the coalition government was trying to deceive residents to leave in order to alleviate the population pressure on the underground city. Ordinary residents don't know, but their management knows that the design of the underground city can support 300,000 people for 100 years. Now, the total population is less than 100,000, and the average age is still decreasing year by year. Such absurd rumors have become increasingly rampant under the operation of the underground faction. The residents who have been suppressed for a long time, under the instigation of the underground faction's covert poking, continuously pour out anger towards the purification faction. Soon, the two purists in charge of the dungeon have resigned as a result. The purification plan was indefinitely shelved, like a dying bounce, and the world returned to its old path. Yudi clenched his fist, wishing to punch these people. She searched for the figure of Qingdai in countless images and found that she was attempting to defect from the dungeon and return to the ground with the blue dragon. She tragically died from a bullet, and a large sealed bag wrapped in light white tender buds scattered on the ground, trampled on by the crisis intervention team. All their belongings have been confiscated, and their deaths have also been seen as a negative case of the underground psychological clinic, calling on managers to pay attention to the mental health of residents. Yudi closed his eyes and asked the system, "Do I have another chance?" The system finally spoke up. "Once. Send me over." A familiar sense of weightlessness came, and with a buzzing sound, Yudi lay down again in the grave she had crawled out of. She pulled out the dirty mask and pressed it against her face. After thinking for a long time, she reached out and smashed open the grave. "You can't count on it anymore, I'll come by myself." End of this chapter. Chapter 6. Difficult to breath pain, 6. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 6. Difficult to breath pain, 6. Yudi found the plant in the same position, broke it off and wrapped it in clothes. After restoring the tomb, he sat on the roadside with his head propped up, waiting for the arrival of Qingdai and his wife. The light shone through the sticky air on Yudi's face, and before Yudi could wave, their car stopped. Yudi straightened his clothes and said to Blue Dragon, who looked at him again, "You can bring." "Get in the car," said Qingdai beside her. Yudi and Lan Long were both stunned for a moment. "Get in the car," Cheng Dai repeated impatiently. Yudi silently pulled open the car door, pushed away Mi Bao who was approaching, and asked the system in his mind, why is Cheng Dai so strange? The system did not respond, probably because it felt that the problem was too intellectual. The car started, but it didn't go in the direction of the dungeon. Instead, it reversed in place and moved away from the dungeon. Yudi tentatively asked Cheng Dai, You're not planning to go back to the dungeon, are you? Cheng Dai released one hand and rubbed her forehead. Have you, ever seen me before? Got it, confirmed the gaze, it's a reborn person. Not only have you seen it before, Yudi said with her eyes dilated. Tell me about your plans this time. Cheng Dai glanced at Yudi, who had nothing to hold, in the rearview mirror and said somewhat displeased, didn't you find the plants from before this time? Yudi took out a cloth bag from his pocket and held it in front of him. Isn't that right? We have prepared enough supplies to live for decades, come with us. What do you want to do? Cheng Dai sneered and didn't speak anymore. This time, Blue Dragon was not as talkative as last time. Apart from occasionally glancing at Cheng Dai with concern, he silently played with the butterfly knife in his hand. Yudi hugged Mi Bao lying in her arms, closed his eyes and took a nap, actually asking the system about Cheng Dai. The system showed Yudi a stack of diagnostic certificates, and in addition to neuropathic headaches, this guy actually had severe schizophrenia, delusions, and bipolar disorder. No wonder Blue Dragon looks like a doormat. Yudi continued to review the medical records and found that there were some delusions in Cheng Dai that matched the world's distress information, as well as some things that had not happened before either in the past or in the future. Yudi has reason to speculate that Cheng Dai may not be mentally ill, but has been reborn more than once. It is just that a large number of different memory fragments have overloaded her mind, making her appear extremely neurotic. Yudi felt strange. Since the world has the ability to revive Cheng Dai, why can't others be reborn? Time and time again, this civilization will always have a chance to survive. The system ignored her anymore. The next journey was spent in silence, until Cheng Dai and the two of them arrived at the edge of the city, between two houses, in front of a dilapidated, public toilet. Blue Dragon looks even more shocked than Yudi. Wife. What is this place? This is the compensation for our disappearance. Blue Dragon was very upset and said, so you cried and asked me for money before, and that's why you brought this thing. You're stingy, who am I for? Cheng Dai kicked him in the calf, leaving behind some dust and no actual harm. Blue Dragon looked pitifully at Cheng Dai with an unattainable expression, holding Mi Bao and saying, that's our reliance for the rest of our lives. Shut up. Look. Cheng Dai kicked him again, walked forward, lifted the faulty sign, and removed the lower cover. There was an inconspicuous iris recognizer under the sign, and when Cheng Dai leaned her face up, she made a beep sound, and the door of the public restroom began to click. After the sound ended, Cheng Dai opened the door closest to the public restroom, and the floor of the compartment turned into a staircase leading underground. Blue Dragon stopped chattering and swaying. He was shocked twice and followed Cheng Dai down the tunnel. At the end of the tunnel, there was a door with an iris lock, and behind the door was a simple elevator. The long wrench had 4 gears, making it seem like a 4-story underground fortress. Blue Dragon entered the elevator and finally regained his voice. Wife, is our compensation enough? Cheng Dai watched the darkness as the elevator descended and said, and our house, all our savings, and a loan we can't afford. Anyway, there's no need to return it. Blue Dragon thought for a moment, as if it was indeed so. The elevator creaked and quickly arrived at the bottom floor. It has to be said that Cheng Dai is a very planned person. She concentrated her limited resources on necessary facilities, and everything else was just fine. Just like an air purification system without equipment, and living quarters on the ground floor. Rather than being a residence, it is more like a cellar of approximately 80 square meters. There is a microbial culture room of about 1 square meter in the corner, following the model of a microbial factory, producing nutrient cakes and purified water. The rest of the space is filled with 2 old spring beds, a pile of wooden boards, and a pile of miscellaneous items, like household waste dumped by a garbage truck. All the things you can use are here, save some. Qingdai waved her hand and pulled Blue Dragon. I think this pile of wooden boards looks good to me. You figure out what furniture to make. Put away the sawdust for me, I'll use it. Blue Dragon nodded and began to tidy up. His good living habits make it impossible for him to tolerate such chaos. She arranged the task for Blue Dragon and pointed to UD, saying, "You come with me." UD follows the flow of kindness. She thinks Qingdai is so good at arranging things, can she lie down and win? Qingdai took her to the planting room located on the 2nd floor. Apart from a different layout, the things inside were similar to those in Yan Yu's laboratory, just a bit rudimentary. Qingdai seems to have prepared the soil suitable for tuber sprouting in advance this time, waiting for UD's sample. UD handed the sample to her and watched her bustle, asking, after planting it, "What do you plan to do?" Qingdai paused and continued to tinker with the temperature and humidity meter, not directly answering her question, but asking her, "How many things do you remember?" UD really wants to say that she knows a lot, but to be honest, none of it counts. Her memory is more like a simulation than a real past. So she carefully told Qingdai about her previous experience, and Qingdai listened carefully. Her furrowed eyebrows finally relaxed a bit. "Are you afraid?" she asked. UD shook his head and said, "It's like dreaming. I think you're too calm, it's not like you've experienced this kind of thing for the first time." "Perhaps. But I only remember so much." Qingdai smiled and her tense nerves relaxed, saying, "I don't know if it's once, twice, or a few times. I don't care anymore. If staying in the dungeon is destined to end badly, why do I have to gather in it? Humans should not stay underground, just like seeds must sprout and break through the soil, otherwise they will rot and die." The sound system started, and Qingdai took out her phone, clicked on an icon on a monitoring software, zoomed in, and saw a stumbling scavenger passing by the public restroom, stopping to rest. There are not only people in the dungeon. People on the surface still have the right to live, rather than being thrown out of the dungeon as garbage and living on their own. You are like me, someone who has a second chance. Qingdai looked at UD with a heavy gaze. "Let's build an underground city together. What do you think?" UD swallowed his saliva. "This Qingdai seems extraordinary, isn't it? Start farming, haha." End of this chapter. Chapter 7. Difficult to breath pain, 7. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 7. Difficult to breath pain, 7. UD listened to Qingdai's lofty aspirations, and deeply reflected on himself, then even more despised the group of people in the dungeon. Qingdai didn't know UD's thoughts, so she instructed him to help her set up all the breeding boxes before returning to the 4th floor. UD was shocked by Lan Long's cleaning speed. In just a few hours, he nailed out a double bed with that pile of wooden boards, and divided the entire cellar into several parts with sheets and wire. He arranged the barely usable items in the dilapidated pile according to his designated area, then dismantled the unused items and prepared to reassemble them. Blue Dragon proudly crossed his waist to show Qingdai his achievements. Qingdai's eyes curved, and she leaned over and pressed it against his cheek as a kiss. Blue Dragon gave Qingdai a hug and beckoned them to eat. The micro and simple microbial factory built by Qingdai is a product of the early stage of soil acidification and the near end of grain harvest, specifically designed for use by households or small units. The main cost of this thing lies in the matching temperature and humidity meter and cultivation formula. She knows how to handle these herself, so she only bought the bacterial strain and synthesis machine, so the cost is not that expensive. When it comes to eating, it's actually about stuffing the microbial secretions mixed with starch in the synthesizer into your mouth with water. Mibao ate his portion slowly, with a reluctant expression on his face. Qingdai finished his meal in 2 or 3 bites, put on his mask, and beckoned the two to go to the first floor together. Here are half a room full of acid soil and weapons and explosives collected privately by Qingdai. Blue Dragon looked at these things with a complex expression on his face. Why doesn't he know his wife a bit? Qingdai tiptoed up and grabbed Blue Dragon's missing ear, saying, "This is all legal. How did you get so many?" Blue Dragons. I noticed the old man on one of the poles with some wear and tear, and was taken aback for a moment. This isn't what I used to do. It's yours. Qingdai crawled in and searched among the dangerous explosives, causing Blue Dragon's heart to jump. And this, Qingdai threw out a shorter one, this, she threw out 2 handles with words engraved on them, "This should also be yours." Blue Dragon held on to the uniform he had previously worn at the Qingdai Research Institute, feeling a bit stunned. "I joined the volunteer rescue team under your name, and your old comrade repaired your things and brought them all." Qingdai held a helmet in her hand and wiped it. "It was originally illegal, but your old comrade was not assigned to the dungeon in our area, so he just helped you with this favor." "Is it old 9? Qingdai interrupted as she saw that Blue Dragon wanted to contact him. "Ground communication has been cut off, you can't reach him." She lowered her head as if to herself and said, "We can't get in touch." "Wife." Blue Dragon suddenly looked at Qingdai with a serious expression and said seriously, "Since the start of the dungeon, it seems like something has been chasing you. I don't know what happened to you, nor do I know why you are so familiar with her, but I hope you can understand that as long as I am still alive, I will definitely face everything with you." "Husband." Blue Dragon held Qingdai in his arms and said, "Don't be afraid, okay?" Qingdai's shoulders trembled as if she was crying. Yudi looked at the 2 people who treated her like air with toothache. He picked up a kitchen knife and knocked on the wall, saying, "I'm telling you, why did you still mess with this thing? We've all eaten nutritious pancakes, and someone still uses a kitchen knife." Blue Dragon glanced at the obstructing Yudi and said, "You don't understand. It has commemorative significance." Qingdai's previously mechanized voice finally caught a hint of shyness. "Don't inquire. Take it for self-defense when you have the chance." Yudi originally intended to put it back in the weapons pile, but upon hearing this, he changed his hand and put it into his shirt pocket. "Don't waste it." Qingdai asked Blue Dragon to set up a restricted area on the ground to prevent any uninformed abandoned residents from approaching. She picked up 2 sets of protective clothing and asked Yudi to put on 1 set, and they worked together to cultivate the soil. "That's right, the snake skin bag contains heavily polluted acid soil. What are you doing? Pretending to be abandoned here?" Qingdai glanced at her with a look at her mental illness and said, "I need to test the ability of a single seedling to purify the soil before I can go up and circle the field." She pointed to the pile of acid soil stored in snake skin bags and said, "This is 30 cubic meters of heavily polluted acid soil. I used a handcart to transport it in bit by bit, help me fill it into the observation box." Yu Disheng looked at a pile of work to be done with an irresistible expression. Qingdai even made her own observation box by heating it with transparent plastic sheets and melting glue. I said, "Can't we go to the ground and search for more of these plants and plant them together?" Qingdai looked at her again with a psychotic gaze and said, "Do you think I haven't looked for it? Every inch of land I can step on, only you can bring this plant to me." Ah! Yudi tilted his head and suddenly woke up, frantically tapping on the system in his mind. "You scumbag, quickly pass me all the information about Qingdai." The system seemed to be collecting and filtering information, and it took a while to pull out the part about Qingdai from the World Rescue Information Package and package it for UD to see. "Don't look, don't know, I'm scared at first glance." Qingdai did so much in these 2 distress messages, but what she did was very marginalized. If it weren't for her deliberate search like UD, it would be difficult to find her. For example, last time, Ching Dai and Blue Dragon were not killed because they defected from the dungeon, it was simply a deceitful tactic used by the underground faction. They were the only remaining members of the Purifying Faction's advance team. After the Purifying Faction was heavily attacked, they made every effort to send them to the ground, which was why they were labeled and then killed. According to the various ways of death that occasionally flashed in Ching Dai's mind, most of the time she died by spitting blood in various ruins, clearly dying from air pollution. Sometimes it's suicide after burying the Blue Dragon. That is to say, in most of Ching Dai's life, she is actually searching for this kind of plant on the wasteland. So how many times did the world go back in the few minutes when I was stunned in the sea of consciousness? Yudi's mind was a bit confused, and his gaze involuntarily followed Ching Dai's skilled movements. Unable to make a decision and hit the straight ball, Yudi shouted to Ching Dai through the breathless protective suit mask, "How many times have you been reborn?" The sound has become dull and low through several layers of interception. Ching Dai felt as if she hadn't heard it before, and her movements became faster and faster. It wasn't until she finished organizing the last observation box that she gently moved her lips and said, 364. Yudi didn't see her seemingly empty answer, thinking that Ching Dai either didn't hear her or didn't really want to talk to her. She doesn't really care about it. I just have doubts about my mission of saving the world. Can someone like Ching Dai, who was born and raised, appear resolute and capable, truly achieve this after experiencing a world where countless rebirths have failed to save her? If she can't do it, is she going to die again? The suffocation on the brink of death made Yudi feel a bit uneasy. The life after being bound to the system made her mistakenly think that she was still alive, and she really didn't have a sense of crisis. Yudi calmed down and decided to help Ching Dai complete the planting experiment no matter what. She always believed that as long as there were variables, there were always different possibilities for something to happen. Perhaps she is the variable. End of this chapter. Chapter 8. Difficult to breath pain, 8. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 8. Difficult to breath pain, 8. Yudi didn't ask Ching Dai about her past anymore, and focused on cultivating the sprouts with her according to Ching Dai's plan. After setting up all the experimental groups, Ching Dai asked Blue Dragon to drive them to the place where they met Yudi and dug out the entire plant tuber. About 23 days had passed since they met, and the stem was actually twice as big as when Yudi dug it out last time, and it was exceptionally heavy. They had to work hard to move it into the carriage. The Blue Dragon has already explored this area, and everything that can be found has been moved back home. Now there are only deserted buildings and occasional scavengers passing by. In fact, the scavengers on the surface now are essentially the abandoned citizens of the underground city, who are rejected by the underground city due to various diseases that affect labor, or some criminal records that have not been pardoned. Yudi did not make much judgment on this, and she can be considered to have stayed in the underground city. The environment there is really not suitable for raising idle people, and it is absolutely not allowed for inhumane and naturally rebellious, destructive elements to blend in. Strong individuals can naturally occupy buildings with relatively less harsh living environments, with basements or internal air circulation systems that have not yet stopped. And those who wander outside are almost all people plagued by diseases. Blue Dragon looked at them, although it was not a pleasant feeling in his heart, he was not foolish enough to offer help, just silently watching them until they left. The place where the fortress is located is backed by a 10-story building, and there are two identical buildings across the road to the north, while to the east is an enclosed abandoned construction site. Blue Dragon set up surveillance and explosives in the direction surrounded by the building, lifted the fence of the construction site, and drove the excavator to the public restroom. Several corpses were tied to the crane arm of the excavator. That is the person Blue Dragon encountered attempting to rob him while searching the building. More than a dozen days have passed, and on the ground around the corpse, there are still some cats, dogs, and birds dying in twos and threes. At this temperature, if it's normal, it's probably going to stink up to the sky. When Cheng Dai and Yu went out, they didn't notice the sign of the demonstration because they had taken a different route. When they returned, they did see it. Cheng Dai was not surprised, and even gently touched Blue Dragon's arm. Judging from her mouth shape, she was probably saying, "Thank you for your hard work." Yu shuddered and hugged me Bao's hood before masturbating. Yes, the air condition near the ground has deteriorated to the point where no mucous membranes can be exposed. But Mibao didn't like to stay at home, so Blue Dragon made a new hood for Mibao that could cover its entire head. Apart from digging plants, they also have one more thing to do when they go out together this time. They need to go to nearby abandoned factories to look for any usable parts, finished products, or biogenerators. Although Cheng Dai had prepared a biological battery and a small generator in advance, they could not guarantee that the environment inside the fortress would persist until the planting experiment was successful due to the rapid increase in air pollution for unknown reasons. Don't look back, the plants did not grow and they were poisoned first. So after listening to Blue Dragon's suggestion, Cheng Dai decided to find more materials to add an air filtration system to the fortress. This is a considerable project, and Cheng Dai doesn't know if she can handle it. Although she has some theoretical knowledge and previous experience in maintenance, it is still difficult for her to independently complete circuit design and wiring. Unfortunately, the technical personnel are all qualified individuals who have been granted special permission to enter the underground city. It is impossible for anyone to stay on the ground, and she has no place to ask for help. Yu was unaware of Cheng Dai's entanglement. In her eyes, many things are actually like snapping her fingers and being completed with a snap. For example, Cheng Dai's extremely precise mastery of soil cultivation formulas. She actually didn't understand how the joy of success after thousands of failures is felt. The factory and the underground city are in different directions and not close. They temporarily store the large stems they have dug up on a layer, take some water and batteries, wear protective clothing, and temporarily seal off the fortress from the outside. Blue Dragon is not worried that anyone will discover this place. After all, when Cheng Dai chose the site, it was actually located below the public restroom. As long as they close the door equipped with iris locks, this public toilet can even be used normally. Regarding this, Blue Dragon can only say that fortunately, masks have become a must-have tool for humans now. Yu doesn't know how to drive such a big car. In fact, she never got a driver's license, neither during her lifetime nor after her death. In the virtual world of the tutorial, she actually drove a bumper car. Anyway, Blue Dragon and Cheng Dai had two different experiences before they arrived at a factory by the river. The gilded large characters on the stone plaque at the entrance have peeled off, and the words, "machine parts," can be vaguely seen. The factory gate is a folding automatic door, which was frequently used by many schools or units during Yudi's lifetime. Blue Dragon relied on his car to install a crash bar and hit it directly by stepping on the accelerator. This automatic door has not been used for too long, it was directly knocked off the track and stuck in the sky. Blue Dragon found a building that looked like a distribution center, parked his car in front, and fired a gun at Cheng Dai and Yu alone. "I haven't been to this area before, I don't know if there's anyone inside. No matter where I go, I'll go first." Cheng Dai nodded and said, "I have an impression of this factory. It was abandoned a long time ago because there was no air filtration. I don't think there will be anyone around. It's better to be cautious." Blue Dragon closed the car door, took a pair of pliers off, and cut off the lock hanging on the door. The door shaft rusted heavily due to not being used for too long. Blue Dragon pulled hard and creaked as if it was about to fall. The harsh sound of scratching the ground, even though it was obstructed by protective clothing and a face mask, made people feel goosebumps and uncomfortable all over. Opening a gap about 1 meter wide, Blue Dragon lowered his body and walked in with a gun. Due to the power outage, the light inside was quite dim, but looking at the scattered goods and the appearance of the forklift, one can still roughly determine his guess. After waiting for more than 10 seconds, Blue Dragon turned on the strong flashlight and scanned around to confirm that there was no threat within sight before allowing Qing Dai and UD to enter. Before the factory closed down, most of the goods had already been transported away. But due to the large size of this warehouse, there are still quite a few scattered goods for the three of them. They climbed up and down for over 2 hours before finally finishing their search. Due to the suffocation of their protective suits, Qing Dai and UD leaned against the pillar to catch their breath, and Blue Dragon also sweated a lot. The harvest was quite good. They found all the components of a large biological generator, and also took a whole box of wireless earphones and small biological batteries. They also removed the copper wires and electrical components that were still usable and prepared to bring them back together. There is still a place behind the car where things can be stored. After finally coming out, they want to get more things back, so Blue Dragon suggested in a good mood, "Go take a look at the office building, maybe you can find some decorations. The house is really ugly. They have been active in the factory for so long, and there is no sign of anyone, so it should be safe." Qing Dai estimated that these things were more than enough to make a 4-layer filtering system, and smiled in agreement. Blue Dragon parked his car in front of the office building, grabbed a large bag, and prepared to sweep it. UD and Qing Dai each took one. Just as he walked to the open door of the office building, UD pointed under the eaves and stopped walking. "What's wrong?" Blue Dragon asked. Qing Dai looked along the direction pointed by UD, and her pupils instantly narrowed. Monitoring, no power outage. End of this chapter. Chapter 9. Difficult to breath pain, 9. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 9. Difficult to breath pain, 9. Upon hearing this, Blue Dragon immediately became alert and escorted the two of them to step back. Suddenly, a smoke grenade flew out of the window on the second floor, blocking their view with a bang. Blue Dragon immediately pressed the two of them to the ground and raised his hand to shoot at the door. At such times, there is no need to consider whether friends are friendly or not. The best way is to take action first. Sure enough, with 2 screams, the 2 people who ran out of the door trying to surround fell to the ground. The people inside the building realized something was wrong, regardless of whether their companions were alive or dead. They shot wildly at the smoke screen, and Blue Dragon pushed Qing Dai and UD away one by one, hiding on both sides of the door frame. He himself used the person who had been knocked down as a shield, pinching their necks and shouting loudly, "We have no ill intentions." The barrage of strafing stopped for a moment, and then became even more intense. The guy held hostage by Blue Dragon was beaten into a sieve, and he had no choice but to roll on the spot. He took out his homemade grenades left and right, tore off the insurance, and threw them in with a thud. The deafening explosion caused everyone to temporarily lose their mobility. The floor on the second floor was blasted with a big hole, and a person bound in various ways fell down the hole, hanging at the end of the steel bars, legs kicking wildly, and a chair sandwiched between his arm and back, shouting, "Help me." As the buzzing in his ears dissipated, Blue Dragon tentatively extended the muzzle of his gun. The person struggled even more fiercely and crashed into the center of the rubble. The sharp edges and steel bars cut through the person's protective suit, exposing the knee wound. Soon, the cry for help turned into a scream. Qing Dai glanced at the person's protective suit, and the badge on their chest was very prominent. It turned out that this person was starting with Y at the Dungeon Research Institute. She shouted to Blue Dragon's ear, "How can we save him? He may be a mechanic." Blue Dragon remained silent as the gun bounced off and the rope that bound the man's hands was broken. The man reacted quickly and tightly grasped the tear in his protective suit, with his feet still attached to a chair. He squirmed towards Blue Dragon's side with a thud. There was no movement upstairs, but Blue Dragon was certain that these people were not dead. There were several black holes on the edge of the large hole in the ceiling, and he could tell at a glance what they were. As the technician slowly moved to the door, he lost his strength and looked helplessly at Yu Di and Qing Dai. Qing Dai Gang was about to reach out and help him when suddenly Blue Dragon pulled her, and in an instant, she swept through a row of barrage where her body was exposed. Fortunately, Yu Di was quick and grabbed the technician's collar, pulling him out of the sight of the second-level gunman. The bullets could barely scrape through the technician's shoe sole, most of which were embedded in the chair. The dust that erupted hit Yu Di's goggles, leaving fine scratches. The technician was so scared that he couldn't catch a breath and fainted. Yu Di had to hold on to his protective suit for him. Qing Dai was a bit nervous, but she didn't say a word. She could see that Blue Dragon was quickly assessing the situation, and she believed he could make the best choice. "Wife," Blue Dragon suddenly turned around and called out. "What do you want?" Qing Dai quickly replied. "I count to 3, you shoot towards the edge of the hole on the second floor." "Okay." Qing Dai nodded and didn't ask Blue Dragon what he wanted to do at all. Blue Dragon took out the last grenade from his waist, pulled out the safety, and held it in his hand. Yu Di didn't hear the conversation between the two. Seeing the movements of Blue Dragon, he shook his hand and pressed it against the electrician's wound. The person let out a scream and woke up. Seeing Blue Dragon's grip on the grenade, he suddenly fainted. 1, 2, 3. Blue Dragon instantly threw a grenade in the center of the big hole. Qing Dai held a gun and started shooting indiscriminately at the hole. Blue Dragon took the opportunity to stride across the open space and roll over from under the car. The sound of the car door opening and closing was masked by the explosion. He got into the car and started the vehicle. A divine dragon swayed its tail and parked the car in front of the porch, with half of the wheels pressing against the steps. Using the top of the porch, the car door was completely blocked. "Hurry up!" Blue Dragon shouted, jumped out of the car, picked up the electrician with one hand, and stuffed it into the back seat, also carrying Yu Di. "Wear him protective clothing." He himself jumped into the driver's cabin holding Qing Dai, stomped on the gas pedal to death, and pulled the 3 of them into a gallop. Mi Bao, who was originally resting in the back seat, was squeezed into the back carriage and leaned his head against the small window. A roar came from the office building, and rifle bullets shot angrily behind them. Yu Di stared blankly at Blue Dragon's series of combos and let out a big sigh in his heart. "I am super. I thought they would be safe after leaving the factory, but the car drove faster and faster." Blue Dragon held the steering wheel tightly with one hand and crashed into the obstacle, which was unknown. Qing Dai and Yu Di hadn't noticed anything was wrong yet, but Lan Long's voice trembled and he called out, "Wife." Qing Dai cast a puzzled look and was frightened into a cold sweat. Half of Blue Dragon's body was convulsing, not only with a grim expression, but his legs were pressing straight on the accelerator, unable to take it off. "Relax, baby. Relax." Qing Dai caught one hand in Blue Dragon's knee socket, trying to bend his leg. Blue Dragon's hand began to uncontrollably pull the steering wheel to the left, watching as the front of the car collided with the shoulder of the road. Yu Di shouted, "Stop! Stop!" Blue Dragon kicked his left leg fiercely, only to hear a piercing scream from the brake disc and tire at the same time. The whole car turned several times in place, and the rear of the car was thrown towards the shoulder of the road, resulting in a big pit. "At least the car has come to a stop." Yu Di covered his small heart, which was about to jump out of his throat, and pinched the neck of the Y-shaped technician to look. Still alive. Qing Dai flipped out a box of syringes from the passenger compartment, pulled out a protective suit, and quickly inserted it into Blue Dragon's spine. The pain twisted Blue Dragon's already convulsing face, and with Qing Dai's massage, his muscles finally slowly relaxed. Qing Dai taped the area where she had her needle inserted and spread her hands trembling on the passenger seat. The medication caused Blue Dragon to enter a brief state of paralysis. It was impossible for Yu Di and Qing Dai alone to drag him out of the cab and stuff him into the passenger seat or back seat. They could only stay here until Blue Dragon recovered. Last time I came, UD heard Blue Dragon tell their story and knew how Blue Dragon's illness came about. However, seeing the appearance of his illness with his own eyes was truly a bit alarming. At this moment, a whimpering scratching sound suddenly came from the rear carriage. Cheng Dai and UD exchanged a glance and raised their hand to pat the forehead. Mi Bao. This silly and cute big dog was knocked unconscious by the shaking, vomited a mask, and couldn't take it off, feeling extremely uncomfortable. Cheng Dai got off the car with trembling legs, got into the back carriage, held Mi Bao's head on her lap, and poured out vomit. UD finally put on a new protective suit for the Y-shaped technician and pinched the person pinching him. The technician with the letter Y slowly woke up and looked at the three people who had saved him, crying uncontrollably. Robbers. National bandits. Goddamn hooligans. UD couldn't help but roll his eyes as he listened to his series of sighs. How did you, a researcher from the dungeon, come here? The person heard the three words, dungeon, and finally stopped crying. Oh, you guys, hiccup, must be here to save me and go back. He struggled to sit up. I want to report, that group of criminals, they want to blow up the dungeon. End of this chapter. Chapter 10. Difficult to breath pain, 10. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 10 Difficult to breath pain, 10, ha. Upon hearing this, UD couldn't help but doubt his own ears. The key areas of the dungeon are all set up on the ground floor. Can a group of thugs who can't even stop them easily explode? She tapped on the man's mask, signaling him to calm down and asked, what's your name? My name is Yen Lin, Three-Mouth Yen, Shuangyulin. Upon hearing this surname, UD remembered a guy who had ambushed her. Who are you, Yen Yu? Yen Lin opened his mouth and pondered, he and I share the same father. UD really wanted to express his opinion on the word sharing, but as he spoke, he rolled his tongue and was still swallowed. Why didn't you enter the dungeon? Yen Lin looked sad and said, our convoy was robbed by this group of people on the way. The others left me behind and ran away. UD looked at his trembling and rabbit-like appearance, and said to himself that you two brothers are really a good person. What is your research content? Is it also a planting experiment? Yen Lin shook his head with a hint of pride and said, I'm doing respiratory system modification. Humans are products of the environment and can only adapt to it. Their thoughts, to put it mildly, are nothing more than talking about dreams. That's really tactful. Have you come up with any results from your research? Yen Lin nodded with excitement in his eyes and said, of course there is. We have developed. What has been developed? Yen Lin seemed to suddenly react and tightly closed his mouth. UD rolled his eyes and lowered his gaze back to the sea of consciousness, searching for information about Yen Lin in the distress message. Body patch. You're really good. UD looked at the human model that looked like it was wrapped in cling film and twitched his lips. You never know what kind of invention desperate humans will come up with. Yen Lin was shocked when she heard that she knew her confidential achievements. He opened his mouth wide like a fool and said, how do you know? I haven't disclosed this achievement yet. Then he pinched his finger and said anxiously, although there are still flaws. I am looking for an inhaled mist film structure. Humans will no longer need to wear protective clothing then. As the age of the dungeon approaches, we must come out. There will definitely be many people who do not adapt to the environment and die. This is saving humanity. UD continued to flip through the information in his mind. This seemingly mysterious guy was also left to die last time, and his identity chip was dismantled by someone, becoming a slave to those thugs. As the air situation continues to deteriorate, the filters of protective clothing are no longer effective, and people must be equipped with respirators and oxygen cylinders to survive on the ground. Due to the shutdown of the factory, it is difficult to find and even produce these two items, and the abandoned residents can only lie in protective clothing waiting for death. In the end, the group of thugs launched a desperate attack on the dungeon gate under the instigation of a madman who couldn't see his face clearly. That is the ultimate venting of the anger of the abandoned people towards the underground city. Do you understand circuits? Qingdai listened to their conversation for a while and knocked on the car wall to ask. Yan Lin rubbed his fingers and smiled, I don't understand. Qingdai seems to have cursed a foul word. The blue dragon on one side finally changed and slightly moved its neck, wailing, wife, it hurts so much. Here we go. Qingdai took off the temporary mask she had worn for Mibao, put a clean hood on it, jumped out of the car, opened the driver's door, and Lan Long's body tilted, almost hitting Qingdai to the ground. Wife, I'm sorry. Blue Dragon struggled to control his muscles. Qingdai touched his neck and said softly, it's okay, come down slowly. I'll help you lie down in the back. Yudi pulled Yan Lin out of the car to help, and the three of them climbed into the back seat together with Blue Dragon. He is too tall to stretch straight, so he can only rest his legs on Yan Lin. Yudi sat in the passenger seat, and Qingdai tried to start it. Fortunately, the car could still be used. Mibao struggled to jump out of the small window, lying in the gap between the back seats, with his head resting on Blue Dragon's chest. I'm going back, Qingdai said, exhaling. Due to the damage to the car, the return journey will take longer than before. Afraid of any accidents on the road, Qingdai dared not drive too tired. By the time they arrived at the cozy public restroom, they were already so hungry that their chests pressed against their backs. This is still due to a constitution where the stomach capacity is not large due to long-term consumption of nutritious cakes. Qingdai stopped the car and asked the two of them to help remove the Blue Dragon. Yan Lin looked at Qingdai in confusion and said, aren't we going back to the dungeon? Yudi looked at him sympathetically and said, the underground city stopped sheltering half a month ago. But I'm a researcher. Yan Lin shouted with a breakdown, how could they not want me? Qingdai looked at him coldly and said, the dungeon is to the north. You can walk 5 or 6 days by yourself and get there. Yan Lin closed his mouth. Obviously, he is also aware of current affairs. Qingdai and Yan Lin carried the Blue Dragon into the house, while Yudi slowly unloaded the things from the car. There are already many observation boxes piled up, and the first layer is filled with parts, making the space even more cramped. Yan Lin leaned around the observation box in confusion and asked, what is this doing? Yudi roughly explained to him, and upon hearing this, Yan Lin was taken aback. When it comes to plants that can grow normally in strong acidic soil, unlike Yan Yu's initial reaction of disbelief, he is curious and listens attentively to Yudi's explanations like a primary school student, occasionally asking technical questions that Yudi finds difficult to answer. Lay Blue Dragon flat on the bed, Yudi decided to push Yan Lin to Qingdai and let them go to the second floor to have a good conversation. Yudi was quite proficient in sealing the entrance and exit, and when everything was ready, she also went back to the 4th floor to nibble on some cakes. Replenishing their energy, the three of them began assembling the bio-generator and filter pipes. Due to the previous impact, the ecological box group of the generator was somewhat damaged, and the oxygen block in the filter pipeline was also a bit ineffective. For long-term use, they only powered the 3rd and 4th floors, while the 1st and 2nd floors used the original ventilation openings, so protective clothing must be worn when going up to the 1st and 2nd floors. Although Qingdai didn't say anything about it, Yudi could still sense anxiety from the way she looked at the incubator. In the previous chat, Qingdai clearly stated that the degree of environmental degradation has accelerated this time, faster than ever before. Qingdai vaguely felt in her heart that this might be her last chance. She only has one experience of cultivating success, and once she fails, she really doesn't know what else she can do. If it is destined destruction, why did she experience so many pains and torments? What are those suffocating feelings that make her despair time and time again? A dark ripple rose in Qingdai's eyes. Ud suddenly pinched Qingdai's shoulder. Look. She pointed to one of the incubators and looked into Qingdai's eyes, saying, "It's sprouting." End of this chapter.